Mystery Phantom.
I first saw the town at 7:41 p.m. That exact time matters because I checked it 3 times afterward, trying to convince myself I'd misread the clock. I hadn't. I was driving west through nothing, that part of Kansas where the land flattens so completely it feels unfinished. No hills, no trees tall enough to interrupt the sky. Just irrigation arms rotating slowly in the distance, spraying water over crops that looked identical mile after mile. I had been on that road before, I was sure of it, which is why the town shouldn't have been there. There was no sign, no welcome to, no population count, no warning, just a cluster of buildings sitting where there had only ever been fields. I slowed without realizing it. The sun was halfway down, turning the sky the color of rusted metal. The light hit the town at a shallow angle, stretching its shadows long and thin across the road as if the place was reaching for it. The buildings looked old, but not abandoned. Paint peeled, yes, but evenly. Roofs sagged, but deliberately, like they'd settled into place over decades. Nothing was broken. That was the first thing that unsettled me. The gas gauge dropped to empty exactly as I passed the first house. Not slowly, not gradually. Empty. The engine didn't stall, but the dashboard lights dimmed as if the car itself was getting tired. I pulled over. The moment I stopped, the sun touched the horizon, and the town finished forming. Lights flickered on, windows warmed with yellow glow, a radio somewhere crackled to life, bleeding static into a half-heard country song. It felt rehearsed, like the town had been waiting for night to complete itself. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled wrong. Not decay, not chemicals, dust, warm soil, and ozone, like the air after lightning, even though the sky was clear. I heard movement then, not footsteps, doors closing, one by one. I walked deeper in. The streets weren't paved, packed dirt, smoothed by years of traffic that clearly no longer existed. Tire grooves were pressed into the surface, but they didn't overlap. Each set looked isolated, as if no 2 cars had ever passed at the same time. The houses faced inward, not toward the road, toward the center of town. That was the second thing that felt wrong. The town square sat where an irrigation hub should have been. Instead of machinery, there was a tall wooden pole, like an old utility mast, with wires running out in every direction, disappearing into the buildings. At its base sat a metal box, a public address system. It hummed softly, even though no one was speaking. That's when I realized something else. There were no people. But there were signs of interruption. A cup of coffee steaming on a porch railing, a child's bicycle tipped over near a fence, a shop door unlocked, swinging slightly in the evening breeze. It felt like the town had paused its occupants, not removed them, just stored them somewhere else. The first voice came over the speaker at 8:03 p.m. A man's voice, calm, familiar, too familiar. "Good evening," it said. "Please remain inside once the final light is gone." The message repeated, then added something new.
If you are hearing this and you do not live here, please understand that staying past midnight is consent." I laughed. I actually laughed because the alternative was admitting that the voice sounded like mine. I checked my phone again. No signal, but the time was still moving. 8:11 p.m. I told myself I'd leave once the sun was fully down. I never noticed when it happened, only that suddenly the sky was black and the road I'd driven in on was gone.
The loudspeaker clicked again at 8:17 p.m. That soft, mechanical tick, the sound a microphone makes when someone leans in close, felt louder than the voice that followed. Night protocol is now active. The words didn't echo, they settled like dust. I stood in the middle of the street, my car behind me, the town ahead, and nothing, absolutely nothing where the road had been. The edge of town didn't fade into darkness. It stopped, clean, sharp, like the world had been cropped there. I stepped closer. The beam from my headlights hit empty blackness and didn't come back. No reflection, no fog, no depth, just absence. That's when the idea of midnight stopped being a time and started being a deadline. The loudspeaker continued. Residents are reminded to remain indoors after final light. Windows uncovered, doors unlocked, silence maintained. Pause. If you are not a resident, choose a house. That part was new. I shouted. The sound didn't carry. It dropped immediately, like the air itself was padded. "Hello!" Nothing answered, but lights flicked on. Not all at once, not randomly, one by one, as if something was looking for me. I walked to the nearest house. The porch boards creaked under my weight, fresh creaks, not the brittle rot of rot. Someone maintained this place. The door was unlocked. I didn't touch it at first. I listened. Inside, I heard breathing, slow, shallow, multiple, but no movement. The sign on the doorframe was carved, not nailed. "Do not speak after 11. No explanation, just the rule. I stepped inside. Air changed immediately, cooler, still, like a church after everyone leaves. The living room was tidy, not staged, used. Couch cushions slightly indented, a blanket folded too carefully to be accidental. On the coffee table sat a notebook, leather-bound, worn, open. The page read, "Day 114. He did not look at the windows tonight." My hands shook as I flipped back. Every page was dated. Every page described me, not by name, by behavior. He parks near the edge. He counts steps unconsciously. He avoids reflections. Things I didn't know I did. Things I had always done. The breathing sound came from upstairs. I didn't need to. The rule was already forming in my head. Residents don't come downstairs at night. The loudspeaker crackled again. 10:30 notice, prepare. I checked the clock on the wall. It worked. 10:21 p.m. That's when the windows began to change. At first, I thought it was just the light outside dimming. Then I noticed the reflections. They weren't mine. The glass showed rooms that didn't exist, hallways longer than the house, doorways that led into black corridors, staircases descending where walls should have been. And behind those reflections, figures, standing, waiting. I backed away from the windows. Every instinct screamed at me not to look too closely, not because I'd see something horrible, but because something would see me back. At 10:48 p.m., the breathing upstairs stopped. At 10:48 p.m., footsteps began, slow, measured, not descending, circling. I left the house. Every door on the street was open now, every window uncovered, and every home had someone inside. I could feel them, not watching, listening. The loudspeaker spoke one last time before 11. Silence period begins. Then, softer, almost kindly, "Thank you for choosing." I realized then what the town meant by consent. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't signed, it was staying. The first scream came from somewhere far away. It cut off instantly, no echo, no struggle, just absence again. I stood in the street, surrounded by open doors, glowing windows, and a town that had fully decided I belonged to the night. And the worst part was the growing certainty that the town hadn't appeared for me. It had always been here, waiting for the moment I noticed it.
Silence at night doesn't sound like quiet. It sounds like pressure. At 11 p.m., the town inhaled and never exhaled. No wind, no insects, no distant highway noise. Even my breathing felt intrusive, like I was breaking a rule by staying alive too loudly. I pressed my lips together and counted seconds instead. I walked. Not because I wanted to, but because standing still felt like volunteering. The dirt street was warm under my shoes, holding heat from the day like a memory it didn't want to let go of. Each step left a shallow print that didn't fade. The town remembered weight. That was my first real understanding of what this place did. I passed another house. Inside, a television glowed blue. Static. No sound. On the screen, a black and white image flickered. A man sitting in a car, headlights pointed into fog. It took me a moment to realize I was watching myself from earlier that night. Different angle, same posture. Same hand tapping the steering wheel when I was nervous. I kept walking. At 11:22, the loudspeaker didn't speak, but it hummed, low frequency, vibrational. I felt it in my teeth. The windows across the street fogged over from the inside, as if someone warm had leaned close to the glass. Then words appeared. Not written, pressed. Letters formed as if fingertips were pushing them outward through condensation. Stay visible. I turned away. The church sat at the far end of town, where the fields should have resumed. It didn't look religious. No cross, no bell rope. Just a tall, narrow building with doors that were too wide and windows that were too high to look through comfortably. The doors were open. Of course they were. Inside, the pews faced the walls, not the altar, not the center.
The walls were covered in clocks, hundreds of them, different sizes, different styles, every single one ticking, out of sync, but all approaching the same time, 11:59. I stood in the aisle, afraid to sit. The clocks didn't mark hours, they marked nights. Each had a label beneath it, dates, names, sometimes just initials. Some clocks had stopped, others were still moving. Mine was already there, second row, slightly crooked, counting down. The loudspeaker voice came from inside the church, right behind me. "You are doing well," it said. My voice, not an imitation, a recording, but older, more tired. "You haven't hidden yet." I turned. There was no one there, but the pew behind me was warm, recently occupied. The voice continued, "Midnight is not an ending here, it is a harvest." The clocks began to chime, not together, in sequence, like a wave moving through the room. At 12 a.m., the lights outside went out, all of them. The church remained lit. That's when the town began to move. The walls breathed, slow expansion, slow contraction. The clocks reset, not to midnight, to 0. I felt it then, a pulling sensation, low in my chest, not physical, directional, like gravity with intent. The door behind the altar opened. There was no room beyond it, just a staircase descending into darkness, carved into earth, each step worn smooth by use. I understood the final rule without being told. Those who stay awake are taken. Those who hide are remembered. I backed away. The clocks began to tick faster. The staircase began to whisper, not words, names, some spoken with relief, others with terror, all familiar. I ran, not fast, carefully, because the town punished panic. I ducked into the nearest open house, closed the door softly, and stood motionless in the dark. The breathing upstairs returned, closer now. From the window, I watched the street. Shadows detached from buildings. They walked, not with legs, but with intention. Each stopped at a doorway. Each listened. When a sound came from inside a house, even a breath, the shadow entered. The house went dark, forever. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't think. And for the first time since arriving, the town passed me by. At 12:41 a.m., the loudspeaker whispered, "Recorded." Morning arrived without sunrise. No color shift, no birds, no gradual warming of the air, just light. It switched on like a bad habit. I realized I was sitting on the floor before I remembered lying down. The house around me looked normal again, too normal. Dust motes in the air, a calendar on the wall flipped to today. No date, just the word printed in block letters. The breathing upstairs was gone. The silence felt thinner now, less oppressive, like the town had relaxed its grip. I stood slowly. My shoes were still on. They were clean. Outside, I heard movement, human movement. The street was alive. People walked, cars idled, someone laughed. I stepped onto the porch and felt the sun on my face, weak, pale, like it was remembering how to be warm. The town hadn't vanished. That was the first lie of daylight. Everyone moved with purpose. Too much purpose. No hesitation, no wandering. Each person followed a clean line from one place to another, like ants tracing paths only they could see. No one looked up. No one acknowledged anyone else, and no one acknowledged me. I walked toward the square. The utility pole was gone. So was the loudspeaker. In its place stood a wooden notice board, freshly painted. No explanation, no consequences listed. They didn't need to be. A woman passed me carrying groceries. I said, "Excuse me." She flinched, not at the sound, but at the timing, like I'd spoken out of turn in a script she was following. She didn't stop, didn't answer. Her shadow lagged half a second behind her steps. I noticed then that the town cast two kinds of shadows. The normal kind, attached, obedient, and the other kind, the ones that leaned toward doorways, the ones that remembered night. The diner was open. I went in because hunger finally made itself known, sharp and undeniable. Inside, every booth was occupied. People ate silently. The radio played a weather report that never mentioned location. I sat at the counter. The waitress poured coffee without asking. It was already cooling. I looked at her face, really looked. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, like she was seeing the idea of the room, not the room itself. "Rough night?" I asked. Her hand paused, just long enough to matter. "Night is night," she said. "Day is for being useful." Then she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. I drank the coffee. It tasted like nothing. Not bad, just absent. That's when I saw the notebooks. Every customer had one. Some small, some thick, all open. People wrote between bites, not journaling, recording. I glanced at the nearest page. The handwriting changed line to line. Different people, same observer. The waitress leaned in. "You were recorded," she said quietly. Not a question, a diagnosis. I felt the words settle into me like a bruise. "What happens now?" I asked. She straightened. "Now you contribute." The bell above the door rang. A man entered. I recognized him instantly because I had watched him disappear the night before. He looked fine, healthy, smiling, but his shadow didn't follow him in. It stayed outside, listening. The realization hit me slowly, mercifully. Morning didn't reset the town. It archived it. Night collected, day organized. At noon, a siren sounded, not an alarm, a reminder. People stood where they were and wrote one final line, then closed their notebooks, together. The waitress slid one toward me, leather-bound, warm, open to a blank page. "Tonight," she said, "you start writing."
The notebook was heavier than it looked. Not in weight, in expectation. The blank page didn't feel empty. It felt paused. I didn't touch the pen yet. No one rushed me. That was the trick. "Right after sunset," the waitress said. "Not before, not during, after." I asked,
after what? She hesitated. Then, after you survive it. The siren at noon marked something else too. Work resumed. The town shifted into function. Trucks moved, crops were checked, repairs were made to buildings I could swear hadn't existed the night before. No one spoke unless spoken to, and even then, only in complete sentences. No questions, no metaphors, no "I think." Language here was for recording, not expressing. I tried to leave again. Daylight made the edge of town look harmless, flat land stretching into haze. I walked until my feet hurt, until the buildings thinned, until the road should have been there. It wasn't. Instead, the ground dipped slightly, like a shallow grave that had been smoothed over. I turned back. The town looked closer than it should have been. By late afternoon, the hunger returned, but different now. Not physical, curiosity-shaped. I needed to know what happened if someone didn't write. I didn't ask. I followed. At 4:18 p.m., a man stopped in the middle of the street. No warning, just stopped. People stepped around him, didn't look, didn't help. He stood there as the sun slid lower, hands shaking, notebook tucked under his arm like a shield. He wasn't writing. I recognized him, not from last night, from the diner notebook. Night 6, he resisted too long. At 7:39 p.m., the town's lights flickered on. The man was still standing. At 7:41, his shadow peeled away. It didn't detach violently. It stepped out of alignment and walked to the center of the street. The man screamed. The sound cut short, and then there were two shadows, neither attached to anything. No one reacted. No one wrote yet. Sunset wasn't complete. The loudspeaker returned at 7:58. Same voice, older again. Failure to record results in reassignment. That was all. Night settled, not quickly, deliberately. I went inside the house I'd slept in, sat at the table, opened the notebook. The pen was already there. I waited until midnight because the page wanted that. The first word came without thought. Night 10. The pen moved smoothly, too smoothly. I wrote what I saw. I wrote what the town allowed. I avoided adjectives, avoided emotion, avoided meaning. Still my hand cramped. Still my chest tightened. Halfway down the page, the pen pulled. Not toward what I saw, toward what I felt. I resisted. The ink blotted. The lights flickered. Something upstairs shifted its weight. I realized then, the town doesn't want truth. It wants alignment. Right, wrong, and the night notices. I corrected the sentence. The house relaxed. When I finished, the notebook was warm, satisfied. Outside, shadows moved again, choosing, listening. At 12:43 a.m., the loudspeaker whispered, "Accepted." I closed the notebook. My handwriting stared back at me. Not just tonight's entries, older entries, different ink, different nights, same hand. The final line on the last page wasn't dated. It read, "You will write until you are read." I finally understood what mourning was for. Not recovery, not relief. Distribution.
I stopped dreaming after my 5th night. Not because sleep got easier, because sleep stopped being private. Morning came again without ceremony. Light, movement, purpose. I woke at the table, notebook closed, pen aligned neatly on top, as if someone had straightened it while I wasn't looking. My hands were ink-stained. The stains didn't wash off. They faded during the day, then darkened again at sunset, like a tide. By now, I knew better than to ask questions out loud, so I watched. Every morning, just before noon, the notebooks were collected, not carried, delivered. People placed them on their doorsteps, open to the most recent entry. Then they stepped back inside and waited. At exactly 11:56 a.m., the shadows came. Not the night ones. These were thinner, sharper, almost polite. They slid across the ground, gathered the notebooks without touching them, and carried them toward the center of town, toward where the utility pole used to be, toward where nothing stood now. I followed from a distance. Distance mattered. In the square, the ground had changed. It wasn't dirt anymore. It was compressed, smooth, like something heavy rested there regularly. The shadows placed the notebooks in a perfect circle, pages facing inward. Then they stepped back, and the ground opened. Not split, not cracked. It unfolded, like soil remembering a shape. What rose wasn't a creature. That's the mistake people make, assuming hunger needs a mouth. This was an absence shaped like a tension. The notebooks lifted, pages flipped without wind, ink darkened, words sank. I felt it reading, not the sentences, the compliance. That's when I understood the clocks, why some stopped, why some disappeared entirely. Nights that are fully recorded are consumed. Nights that resist are preserved. Preserved doesn't mean saved, it means set aside. The thing lowered itself back into the ground. The earth smoothed. The notebooks returned, closed now, lighter. I checked mine. 3 pages were gone, not torn, removed. The nights I'd written perfectly. That afternoon, I tried something dangerous. I tried to remember. I sat alone and thought about my life before Gray Hollow, about my apartment, my job, my name. The memories felt thin, like photographs left in sunlight too long, edges curling, details bleaching out. I grabbed the notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote a single word: escape. The pen hesitated, the ink pooled, the house creaked in warning. That night, the rules changed. The loudspeaker came on earlier, 9:12 p.m. You may write freely tonight. That was the most terrifying sentence I'd heard so far. I hid, not out of fear, out of strategy. I waited. I listened. The shadows moved faster tonight, less selective, impatient. They didn't listen at doors. They entered.
Houses went dark one after another, not permanent darkness, temporary, like a blink. At midnight, the loudspeaker spoke again, reader engaged. I felt it then, not underground, above, like the sky leaning closer. The air thickened with focus. I opened the notebook. The page was no longer blank. Words were already there, in my handwriting, describing this moment, including the sentence I was about to write next. I didn't finish reading it. I closed the notebook and shoved it under the floorboards. The house shuddered. Something scratched beneath me, frustrated. I realized the final truth too late. The reader doesn't need ink. It needs witnesses. Writing is just how it counts them. When morning came, the town felt lighter, like it had eaten well. And somewhere, something was still waiting for me to finish my sentence.
I learned how people disappear during the day. Not vanish, unregister. It happens quietly. A person finishes a task, stacking crates, sweeping a porch, tightening a bolt, and then simply stops being referenced. No one reacts because there's nothing to react to. I noticed it with a man named Caldwell. I only knew his name because it appeared in my notebook without my permission. Night 12, Caldwell hid too well. During the day, Caldwell worked the grain silo, tall, careful, always humming under his breath. At 10:32 a.m., he set down his wrench. At 10:33, the wrench hit the ground, but Caldwell didn't. He wasn't gone. He was unwritten. The sound didn't echo. No shadow remained, and the silo looked like it had never needed maintenance at all. That's when I understood what witnesses really were. Not observers, anchors. The town didn't need us to see it. It needed us to keep it defined. Every written night was a boundary. Every recorded behavior told the reader what shape reality should keep. People who hid too well stopped contributing shape, so they were released. That afternoon, I stopped writing details, not events, not actions. I stopped writing distinctions. I wrote, Night 13, it was the same. The pen resisted. The ink faded as soon as it touched the page. The house creaked violently, but the sentence stayed. The loudspeaker didn't come on at sunset. That had never happened before. No announcement, no permission, just night. The town felt uneasy. Lights flickered out of sequence. Doors hesitated before opening. Shadows moved with less confidence, pausing like they were waiting for instructions that weren't arriving. I waited, because I finally knew the rule that mattered. The reader cannot define what is not distinguished. It consumes clarity. It feeds on structure, and I was about to starve it. At midnight, the sky changed, not darkened, flattened. Stars smeared into pale streaks like chalk dragged sideways. The air vibrated, not with sound, but with attention redirected. The loudspeaker screamed, not a voice, feedback, the sound of something trying to speak through a system that no longer recognized it. I opened the notebook. The page tried to fill itself. I pressed the pen down and wrote over the words as they formed. Not sentences, noise, lines, blots, contradictions. The ground in the square buckled. The reader rose, farther this time, not fully, but enough. And for the first time, it hesitated. I felt it searching, not for me, but for definition, for a witness willing to say what it was. I stayed silent. I stayed vague. I stayed useless. The clocks in the church stopped, all of them, at once. That's when I realized the most dangerous thing I could do: make the town uninteresting. Morning came broken. Light flickered. People moved uncertainly. Notebooks lay untouched on doorsteps. Shadows didn't collect them. They didn't know how. The waitress met my eyes for the first time. Fear, real fear, flashed there. "You're erasing us," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm letting you blur." That night, the reader did not feed, and something that had never happened before happened. The road twitched.